cross-cultural families, as well as parents of Australian-born children, can face similar circumstances when passing on Chinese traditions and culture to the next generation.
My wife's family are Singaporean. My wife was born in Australia but grew up in Singapore with parents of a Chinese background, then came back to Australia to finish her secondary education, has lived here since. So our children can trace their ancestry from two different parts of the globe, from China on one side of the globe and from England and Wales and France on the other side of the globe. And it is a challenge to ensure that your children are taught about their different ancestry, particularly I think from a Chinese background in a country like Australia that still sort of predominantly draws its background from the western part of the world, to make sure that children know about their Chinese heritage and culture. And that's certainly something that we've tried to do with our children, and one of the great benefits and important reasons for festivals such as the Chinese New Year Festival and the Moon Festival is it does give a chance for kids of a Chinese background to learn more about their culture and heritage and some of the traditions and stories and fables. We often talk to our children about some of the legends of Chang'e, the Lady in the Moon, and the Rabbit, and the Elixir of Life, and so all of those stories that are part of Chinese cultural heritage, that unless you tell your children about, they don't get to know of.
So growing up, how do you balance the cross-cultural aspects in your family life? Were there any challenges or issues?
Look, I don't think particular challenges other than making sure and taking the effort to tell kids about the Chinese part of their heritage. We've been fortunate in our family to meet up with my wife's parents quite frequently to take the children when they were growing up back to Singapore. So things like the Ang Pao red envelopes as part of the Chinese tradition that kids very much welcome.
My favourite tradition.
I think at each step of the way, and I think as children grow up, I sometimes hear of parents a little bit frustrated that their children want to speak to them in English rather than Cantonese or Mandarin. I think that's a challenge faced by many multicultural communities.
Anecdotes in terms of some of the differences?
I think every generation from every cultural group faces the same issue. You talk to Greeks, they tell you the same story. The Somalians are finding that out, as they go to the second generation there are. In fact, Somalians, I've met the kids who were born here 20 years ago. And there is that generational issue. So it's not unique to the Chinese, but there are obviously within every cultural group uniqueness about the way they deal with those issues. In terms of that question, what about the specific Chinese issues about dealing with these intergenerational issues? Some kids will move on. They become very Aussie. But in due course, they will find their own place. They will find a reflection for themselves. But where we have is the freedom to do that. You can be free to move away from your culture, to speak a different language, to even change your religion. Right? And this is what diversity is about, the respect for things to happen. But in terms of keeping the heritage, we promote that, we support the museum, we support Chinese events, and we encourage it. I encourage my kids to keep on with what I believe are essentials of the culture. So Chinese New Year is a big celebration for us. We make sure the kids come home, dinner, if they can. If they're not living in Canberra or Bendigo, they should come home. For some migrants who have been here, because of European background, if you're Jewish or Greek, you could actually be mistaken for an Anglo. But the Chinese would never do that. The Asians would never. You look in the mirror, 4 generations down the track, you'll look different. You'll always be, in that sense, reminded you're Chinese. And therefore, it is both a plus and a minus in saying, what does that mean for me? My kids do ask a question, a tough question. They said, are we Aussie, are we Chinese? Yeah. Right? These are tough questions. And they will define their own framework within the guidance we can give them. But they need to find for themselves. But what we're saying is that the Chinese have been quite good at maintaining their own traditional background up to this point. Some have been here a very long time. You met some of them, Mr. Wellington Li, for example, 4 generations. He's still in many respects as Chinese as I could be as a Chinese, in terms of his involvement, in terms of his sense of history as well, his contribution as an Australian. It very much still couches him. Wellington Li is a Chinese Australian.
Gladys Li migrated to Australia to study. and has since raised her 2 Australian-born children in Melbourne. She believes that her parenting style has been influenced by both Western and Eastern cultures, and she hasn't been the stereotypical Chinese parent who encouraged their children to pursue a career as a doctor, lawyer, or accountant.
I don't believe parents should set the path for their children, like what subject, what course they should take at university. For me, both my children, they have been doing very well academically, and they can choose, basically, they can choose whatever course they want to do at universities. A lot of Chinese families, they put the emphasis on the academic result, whereas for me, if they pass, better than pass, I'm happy. They don't need to be the top student in the class, and they don't need to learn 2 levels above their level. For me, to have a child who is an all-rounder is more important. But they spend most of their time to learn something else. Say, for example, my children learned the piano. I don't want them to be a musician. I never force them to practice hours and hours, but I want them to have the knowledge and to have the appreciation of music, and that's what I want. I encouraged them to play sports. In fact, both my children have been captains of different kinds. My son has been the captain for orienteering, whereas my daughter, she was the captain, the sports captain of the school. So this is, I think, more important to have their physical development, to have their social development, and as well as their academic development. I encourage my children to play team sports because this is where you get to interact with other children. You learn the skills to negotiate. You learn the skills to be a leader. And this is most important when you finish your study, when you get into the workforce, and to know how to work with people. And hopefully one day you can be the leader of the field.
Chin Tan's children are also Australian-born Chinese and are now all grown up. Ironically, his children have pursued a career in the medical and law fields, but he explains that this wasn't due to any of his influence.
I mean, my kids weren't given any incentive or weren't pushed to take up any particular field. I always said, my son wanted to be an electrician, a plumber. I'm happy with that as long as they enjoy it. But even for me, as first generation Chinese, very Aussie and at home, well, we didn't educate or pushed or direct them in any way. I end up with a daughter who is a doctor and a son who's got a law degree, right? But would I be comfortable if they were something else? They were an artist or a pianist or what I would have been. But they're not. One's a lawyer, one's a doctor. Need to find some capacity to then integrate the two. Because my children have a great sense of the civic responsibility. My daughter works a fair bit with refugees and the people who are in need. My son has a very social outlook in terms of that legal degree that he's got. So maybe it's being able to nurture them differently as we go forward. So it's an intergenerational issue. It's a diaspora problem for Chinese anywhere they go. The level of contribution.
From our interviews in this episode, it seems that there is an overall acceptance that culture will naturally evolve, whereas for others, there is a stronger desire to preserve Chinese traditions. What about for you and your family? Do you identify or instill different values from different cultures? Join the conversation on our Twitter feed or Facebook page.